Hey everyone, welcome back to the March Madness Bracket Battle Series. We are doing a little preview video for the Sweet 16 and doing a little recap of the first two rounds as well. So we've got our rankings here, as well as a couple other things we're going to talk about, and we're going to go over some of Brad the Bracket Brachiosaurus's best bets, bad bets, and bold bets that we're going to talk about for the coming next couple rounds. So we can jump right into it by reviewing our rankings. So you can see here we've got the rankings, each bracket listed with the number of points it's got. All of those numbers are out of 64 through the first couple rounds, and the next column you see next to it is how many remaining of the 16 teams do they have in their bracket. But starting off with points, we've got first place Chalk with 36 points per game, in second place with 33, the number of wins bracket with 29, the random number bracket with 28, the win percent bracket with 26 points, tied with also the margin and scoring margin and coin flip brackets in fifth. And then eighth is the least losses bracket with 18 points, and our sad points per game allowed bracket in ninth, dead last with 12 points. So we had talked a little bit about these obviously in past videos, and one thing obviously we mentioned a lot was that the points per game allowed bracket was probably going to continue to struggle, and I would say continue to do so because obviously it has the least number of teams left in its bracket. Let me actually find that one right here so I can actually tell you which teams it has left so that it has a potential to, maybe make a difference. We'll see. I should have prepared this a little better, but I didn't. And so now I'm trying to figure out where. This is the problem with having, 1,000,000,006 brackets like I do. What did I do with these? Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. So the teams it has left that could potentially help it out are Loyola Chicago and Houston, and they're in the exact same part of the bracket in the Midwest. And so with that, it doesn't look likely. If Loyola Chicago wins, it'll get a nice boost because that's who they have as their champion. So potentially could do better, but I don't think it's going to do all that much better. And then everyone else, except for random numbers and coin flip, has at least 6 of the 16 left. Random numbers has 3 and coin flip has 5. So those are kind of going to fall off a little, I would say. But our leading brackets, so Chalk and points per game has 7 out of 16 and 6 out of 16 respectively. So those look pretty good, especially because we had obviously picked those Chalk brackets to do pretty well. One thing that I also did over on this side of the board is I listed the number of brackets that each team is winning in. So obviously it's led by Gonzaga with 7 since they're winning 2 of the Chalk brackets, just like the other 1 seeds we have, and then a bunch of like the points per game and win percentage and all that. They kind of swept those. I think it's points per game, scoring margin, least losses, most wins, and win percentage, plus the other 2, so that makes 7. Baylor wins 2 of the Chalk brackets, Michigan wins 2 of the Chalk brackets, and Loyola Chicago wins the points per game allowed bracket, while Illinois and Georgetown are both obviously out, but I listed them just to keep our numbers straight. So Illinois won 2 Chalk brackets, and then Georgetown had both the random numbers and coin flip bracket in its corner, but they're out now, so that's why those brackets will probably start to fall off. Getting into the best bets, where's Brad's over here? Getting into our best bets, our bad bet, and our bold bet that we have. Our best bet that we're going to go with, we're going to have to make an adjustment. We had set our best bet for our bracket. We were going to do Gonzaga, Illinois for the Chalk. So that was 2 and 5, if I remember correctly. But obviously with Illinois out, we've had to make an adjustment here. And I think now I'm still sticking with the Chalk just because, 1, they're performing the best out of any of the brackets currently. But 2, it also has, obviously, like you can see, tied for the most teams left. So they have the best chance to do well. I think 1 and 3 are the next best bets because they have Gonzaga Baylor as the matchup, and obviously that just seems like the most likely thing to happen in terms, like those are the 2 most favored teams in terms of betting odds, and I think just the general consensus that they have the best chance of winning, but obviously it's March and all kinds of upsets could happen, so we'll keep our eyes on it. I also think the number of wins bracket could potentially end up doing pretty well. It has 7 out of 16 teams left as well. It's sitting in 3rd place in our rankings, and it has Gonzaga Houston as its final matchup. And honestly, looking at it now, it's got Gonzaga versus Alabama in one side of the Final Four, and then Houston versus Winthrop in the other. Obviously, Winthrop wouldn't happen, but those other three are very likely outcomes for the Final Four teams, and the championship game is still intact and able to work. So I think with that, you could definitely see some potential in there to be a winning bracket. I also think the scoring margin bracket could do pretty well. It has 6 out of 16 teams, so a little bit less, but the only team that in its Final Four that would miss out is Abilene Christian. It has Gonzaga, Baylor, and Houston, as well as having Gonzaga, Houston in its matchup as well. So those are 2 more that I'm going to keep my eyes on as potential best, but I still think those 2 chalk brackets, number 1 and number 3, which have Gonzaga and Baylor winning respectively in that matchup, will probably end up doing the best. But like I said, we're going to keep our eye on it as we move along. My bad bet is going to be the same as Brad's bad bet as well. Is going to be the same as what it was earlier in the beginning of the series, where we thought the points per game allowed bracket was probably going to do the worst. And it's sitting at the worst. It's got the least amount of points by a pretty big margin, and it's got the least amount of teams by a pretty big margin as well, with, like I said, most of the other teams having 6 or 7 of the 16 left. This one only has 2, like I mentioned, which is Loyola Chicago and Houston. So a little bit of help there with those teams, but not enough to, I think, get it out of the hole. So another one we're going to track. And then our bold bet that we're going to go with for the next few rounds that we'll be tracking is, I think I actually talked about this in my sports broadcasting class on a talk show that we did as part of our daily or weekly news show that we do on Thursdays. It was a kind of a roundtable discussion about the coming rounds, and my predicted Final Four, I said, was going to be Gonzaga, Villanova, Alabama, and Loyola Chicago. My thoughts for that is that Gonzaga obviously was the team to beat coming in, and still is. I think they've really reinforced that status of being the team to beat with their first couple of games, and have performed immaculately so far. Jalen Suggs, Corey Kispert, and Drew Timme are a phenomenal trio. Drew Timme and Corey Kispert have been playing some of their best ball so far. One of them, I think Drew Timme had 30 points in their last game. And the big thing is Jalen Suggs, who's obviously, like I said, one of the best players on that team, hasn't even played to the best of his ability yet. I think he had 6-8 points, something like that, in their first game against Norfolk State, and then in a game against Oklahoma had 15 or 16, I believe. And so, if he can really start firing on all cylinders, they can definitely have some potential to make a really good run and potentially a national title and an undefeated season for Mark Few and the Bulldogs. So that's one I'm definitely pretty confident on. My more bold ones are obviously Villanova, Alabama, Loyola Chicago. Starting with Alabama, I think they've gone relatively under the radar in this tournament. They've had a couple solid wins against Iona and Maryland. Obviously not the toughest opponents in terms of seeding or matchups or anything like that, but they won them pretty comfortably, and their defense looked good. One thing I noticed is they didn't have a lot of help scoring off the bench in one of those games. I think it was the Iona game, but I think if they can continue to have that and play the good defense that they have in the little bit I've been able to watch them, they definitely have a chance to beat Michigan in the East and come out as regional champion and represent them in the Final Four. Villanova has the toughest matchup and I guess the toughest road to the Final Four. They have to go up against Baylor in the Sweet 16 and then either Arkansas or Oral Roberts in the Elite Eight. So obviously Oral Roberts would be a little bit of an easier matchup by paper standards, so like just going off of rankings. But if they end up beating Arkansas, who knows, they could also beat Villanova. That's a strong team, and they've got nothing to lose, so they're playing their hearts out. So that'll be one interesting matchup to watch. But I think Villanova obviously is, in terms of Sweet 16 matchup, has the hardest road to go through, which is they have to go through Baylor, who, like I said, I'm kind of contradicting myself saying that I think chalk 1 and 3 being the Baylor-Gonzaga matchup is going to be the best bracket, but also picking this as my Final Four. I think there's a chance that Villanova can do it. Jay Wright always gets the best out of his Villanova teams in March. They've got a couple championships over the last 5 years or so, and I think with that, he knows the position that they're in, he knows how to be a great leader, and he knows how to get the best out of those teams. So I wouldn't be shocked if Villanova made a run to the Final Four out of the South region. And then my last one, Loyola Chicago, is probably the biggest surprise out of those four because they weren't really, they're not ranked so highly where they could potentially make that run. People are like, oh, it's an 8 seed, like maybe. But I think they have such a strong defense, and as we saw in their last game against Illinois, that defense holds up against the best opponents. Illinois was a top 20 scoring team. They scored 80 points a game, and Loyola Chicago held them below 60. So obviously they can hold their quality opponents to some low scoring totals, and that'll really help them out. They've got to go through Oregon State and then either Syracuse or Houston. Houston obviously being the toughest of those three in my mind, but if they come up against Syracuse, they've got a tall task of shutting down Buddy Boeheim, who's had a fantastic tournament so far and can score the ball in a variety of ways and all over the court. So it'll be a tough matchup for them, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to see them in the Final Four and even potentially in the championship game if they, come out with a really, really strong performance against one of these other teams that they might have to come up against. Their toughest matchup in the Final Four would be Baylor, I'd say. And even if that happens, there's, like I said, they've shut down Illinois, who's got some great players and a really good team. There's no reason that they can't do that to Baylor as well. And hell, even potentially Gonzaga if they meet in the title game. This could be another fairy tale run for Loyola Chicago. They've got Sister Jean behind them, and I think they're kind of America's underdog team. I think everyone wants to see them do well just because, it's a Missouri Valley Conference team. You don't see, these mid-major teams making these crazy runs. I mean, obviously they made a run to the Final Four in 2018 as an 11 seed, but at the same time, I think everyone wants to see them do well. It's just such a fun team to watch, and it's so much fun, seeing Sister Jean in the stands and having her all over social media has been awesome to see. So those are my predictions there. One thing I also wanted to mention is that one thing that stood out was the margin of victory through these first couple rounds of games. I know we talked in the last video about how on Monday's games there were, I think the average winning margin we calculated was like almost 20 points, which is absolutely insane. And I calculated the average margin of victory through the first two rounds for all the games was about 13 points. I think just over 13, which is just as crazy. There's been a couple close games, a couple games that missed buzzer beaters and stuff, and a couple 1-point games in there. But for the large majority of these games, they're all being won pretty comfortably. I mean, that's not a one-possession, two-possession type game that we think of when we think March Madness. We're thinking about crazy games that come down to the wire, but these have all been fairly comfortable wins that I haven't been that close for these teams. And, they've been skewed, obviously, by that slate of Monday games that were pretty heavy blowouts, like we were mentioning. But it's still kind of crazy to see, so I want to see if that trend keeps up throughout the rest of the tournament. So those are my kind of things I've been looking at, and my bold bets and all of Brad's other bets that we'll also be looking at throughout. Moving on to the last kind of thing we'll talk about is just games that I think are going to stand out to me. I think USC-Oregon is going to be a really good one. That's a 7 and a 6 seed matching up from the same conference, so that these teams know each other well. They play each other every year, and I think that'll be a really, really interesting one to watch. I think the Baylor-Villanova game, like I said, is going to be a lot closer than people think. I think Villanova has definitely got a chance to win it. I think that'll be one I'll definitely be watching. And then both of those games in the Midwest, Loyola Chicago and Oregon State, and Syracuse and Houston, both really stand out to me as a couple of really strong games, and probably see some of the best games that we've seen so far in this round in my mind. Just going back to Houston, I think just like Alabama, number one, they're a 2 seed, but number two, I think they've really gone under the radar. Everyone's been talking about Oral Roberts and Gonzaga steamrolling all their opponents and all this stuff. But I think those two teams, Alabama and Houston, could sneak their way into the Final Four. Like I said, I've got my predicted Final Four that I've got, but there's a number of possibilities on how this could go. It's March Madness. You never know what's going to happen. So those two teams have really gone under the radar, but I think those two Midwest games could definitely be some real action-packed and fun and exciting games to watch. So definitely going to keep my eyes on those, and obviously going to watch every game because you never know what you're going to miss if you don't watch them. So definitely looking forward to that. Obviously, I'm going to keep my eye on the Gonzaga game, see if they can replicate that performance they've had against Oklahoma and Norfolk State against an even more quality opponent like Creighton. Obviously, these games are going to be more increasingly difficult for them as they go forward, but they've got their work cut out for them, but they're the team to do it. Like I said, they're the team to beat, and everyone's gunning to beat Gonzaga. So we'll definitely keep our eyes on that. If you guys have been watching along throughout the series, I really appreciate it. If it's your first time checking in and you came across this video or, found it on one of my social medias, definitely go check out some of the other ones. I've really had a lot of fun tracking these brackets and scoring them and doing all these different trends and stuff. It's been a really cool way to keep myself even more engaged in March Madness than just watching the games. I'm watching more intently, which I like as a sports media major and someone who wants to be a journalist in the future. It's been a lot of fun. So if you guys are following along, I appreciate the support, and I'll catch you guys in the next video once we wrap up Saturday's games. So tomorrow, today's Friday, we'll do a little wrap-up video for that. look at our brackets, and then we'll do it again for Sunday, and then move on into the Elite Eight after that and do another little preview video like that. So hope you guys are enjoying. Thanks so much for the support, and I'll see you guys in the next one.